Hello, you're watching HealthDay Now. I'm Mabel Jong. Thanks for joining us. Clear across the country, people have been seeing hazy skies from huge wildfires burning out west. In California, the Dixie wildfire continues to rage, burning more than 244,000 acres of land, an area bigger than New York City, and that's in just over 2 weeks. This may be just the beginning. Fire season, longer than before, has several more months to go. Officials say the state's historic drought, heat wave, and low precipitation levels fueled by climate change have primed Dixie to burn big. That's terrifying to nearby residents and to the fire personnel battling the blaze. Here with me now is Mike Ming, staff chief of the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program at CAL FIRE, a 30-year veteran of the force. He's been on the front lines fighting some of the biggest fires in the state of California. Chief Ming, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Now, fire season in your state is a perennial event, a natural and inevitable part of the landscape. But how are the fires different from when you first started?
Yeah, so that's a great question. 30 years ago, we did have major fires, large fires. A 10,000 acre fire, even to a 100,000 acre fire, would be once a season, as it were. And so we did see those fires, but over the past, I'm going to say 5 to 7 years, we have seen the intensity and the frequency, the size, the destruction, and the death toll has been raising each and every year. So each year surpasses the year before.
Okay. Now, studies suggest that firefighters are more prone to certain types of cancer and other illnesses, particularly in urban areas. Is that your experience?
Most recently, the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety did 2 large studies that focused on firefighter cancer, and they concluded that firefighters face a 9% increase in cancer diagnoses and a 14% increase in cancer-related deaths compared to the general population in the United States. So urban versus the wildland, there's still carcinogens, and then again, I would just say the proximity to those toxins in those city areas may potentially elevate those risks to our folks.
The risks are so great, in fact, that your insurance plans do talk about this.
Yeah, so the cancer and heart disease are they're considered presumptive, meaning that if you are diagnosed with them, or one, hopefully not both, it's presumed that it is work related. And so it shows a long history of our relationship to those toxins and carcinogens, and the fact that legislations and law have been passed that it is presumptive if you are diagnosed.
Firefighting these days has been described as a kind of military deployment, but perhaps worse.
Yeah, I'm not being a military vet myself. I would say this. Military usually have, and from what I understand, maybe a year-long deployment. It starts at this time and it'll end at this time. Of course, that can be adjusted. When we're in the burning season, the intensity burning season, we don't know when that will start or necessarily when that will end. And we can be deployed 20 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, really with no end in sight.
During the last 3 to 5 years, firefighters in your state have seen some of the worst fire seasons in state history. In some places, it's hardly a fire season at all. It's the year. Aside from the obvious physical risks, what is the lasting health impact of that kind of experience on firefighters?
Yeah, so you're in my bailiwick now with the program that I run. We're talking about behavioral health and its lasting effects. So what we see is isolation, depression, anxiety, addictions, divorce rates are up, sleep deprivation, which is a carcinogen in its own right. It's directly related to cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, post-traumatic stress injury, and suicidal ideation. So the lasting effects are real. And, Johns Hopkins and Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance tracked in 2017, I believe it was, that the suicide rate outpaced the line of duty deaths for first responders. So this potentially is contributing to the growing intensity and frequency of the fires, or actually even in law enforcement, the political environment in our culture that we're in.
Well, thank you so much, Mike Ming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Mike Ming, Staff Chief of the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program at CAL FIRE. He runs employee support services and also the wellness unit. In recent weeks, tens of millions of Americans have lived and breathed through a thick haze of wildfire smoke. The immediate health effects are obvious: stinging eyes, respiratory distress. But much less is known about what happens after the smoke clears and what exactly is in that smoke. Joining me now is Peter Dicarlo, Associate Professor of Environmental Health Engineering at Johns Hopkins University, and also Dr. John Balms, a California air pollution researcher with UCSF and also UC Berkeley, and also spokesperson for the American Lung Association. Great to have you both here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Professor Dicarlo, let's start with you. What is happening with climate change in the Western United States and surrounding areas, and how is that linked to the length and intensity of these fires now burning?
So climate change has multiple effects, and I think the one people are most familiar with is higher temperatures, but climate also changes precipitation patterns, and what we're seeing is an incredibly dry Mountain West and Western United States. And that leads to more fuel for fires, which can then burn longer and hotter than they would otherwise in a wetter climate or in a wetter scenario, which we've previously had.
And if fires are burning hotter and with greater intensity, what does that mean for the smoke? Forest fires versus urban blazes?
In addition to burning forests, you're burning urban areas and places where people live. And so, people are familiar with wood smoke. It's something that, if you have a fireplace at home or if you've been camping, we know what wood smoke is like. But when you start to burn people's homes, you're not only burning wood and grass and leaves anymore, you're also burning things like laptops and appliances and paint and plastics and other things. And those are not what you typically find in a forest fire, but they add additional chemicals, heavy metals. When you burn PVC or polyvinyl chloride, you can release hydrochloric acid, which you really don't want to be breathing that kind of thing. And so in addition to the typical emissions from forest fires, you're now layering in additional toxicants and things that can be dangerous for people to breathe and have additional health impacts beyond just the wood smoke.
Dr. Balms, what diseases or conditions are linked to breathing that wildfire smoke that we just heard about?
Last summer, August and September of 2020, we had bad air quality for almost a month in Northern California. And Marshall Burke of Stanford did an analysis of the excess exposures to PM 2.5, the fine particulate that can make it all the way down in the deep lungs, which is associated with increased risk of death. And he estimated there were 1,200 to 3,000 excess deaths over that month due to the poor air quality from the wildfires. And so there were increased visits to the emergency room in the midst of a pandemic with asthma exacerbations, exacerbations of other types of lung disease. We've also learned over the last few years that cardiovascular disease can be exacerbated by wildland fire smoke. And so people with coronary artery disease, the kind of heart disease that causes heart attacks, or cerebral vascular disease, the kind of disease that causes strokes, that there can be exacerbations of heart attacks and strokes caused by exposure to wildfire smoke.
Is it likely then that there will be an increase in these conditions if these wildfires continue to become more frequent and severe?
Yes. And in addition to exacerbations of disease in people with pre-existing heart and lung disease, we're also concerned about exacerbations, or actually really increases in risk for lower respiratory infections in everyone, not just people with pre-existing heart and lung disease. And that's particularly important in the midst of a pandemic. And now there are data emerging that air pollution in general and wildfire smoke, fine particulate, can increase the risk of COVID-19.
Professor Dicarlo, we all have these apps on our phone, weather apps. They may warn us that the air is unhealthy. How should we interpret that? What does that mean?
So unhealthy is a classification for air quality that reflects the concentration of both fine particulate, so particles in the air, and ozone. And depending on the concentration levels, the air quality index, which is where this classification comes from, air is classified as either good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive groups. You're asking about unhealthy, which is the next level, and then very unhealthy and hazardous. And so as you can see, it goes from good to pretty bad. Unhealthy is the category at which pretty much everyone will be impacted with the levels of air pollution, whether it be fine particles or ozone in the air. The step below unhealthy for sensitive groups, I'm a dad, I've got 2 little boys. One of them has asthma when he's got a respiratory problem. And so kids, elderly, and people with existing conditions are in the unhealthy for sensitive groups, which is a classification below. And so they're going to be the ones impacted at even lower levels than what's considered unhealthy. And then as you get worse and worse, you basically want to take all the precautions you can. You probably want to minimize exercise, especially outdoor exercise, and try to not breathe as much. And so activities that make you breathe more are going to make you breathe more air pollution at those higher levels. And so indoors and minimizing exercise are kind of what you want to do when the air quality gets to that unhealthy level.
Dr. Balms, do you think that the worsening fire season on the West Coast is going to force a lot of people to move elsewhere in the coming years?
You know, it's pretty scary to have poor air quality for weeks at a time. So I think it has caused some people to think twice about staying in California. It's still an amazingly beautiful state. And it's also a state that takes climate change seriously. Because of the wildfires and the drought, the majority of the population, a large majority, is interested in clean energy and clean transportation solutions. And so I hope that people stay in California and double down on what we need to do to try to mitigate climate change.
Professor Dicarlo, really, is there any place safe from the changing climate and the destruction that's linked to it?
I mean, the climate is changing everywhere. And so every place that we live is different than it was a decade or 2 decades, even 3 decades ago. And it will continue to change. And so with that change comes added risks in some places. We're seeing the wildfires in California. And it's just something we're going to have to figure out, hopefully mitigate as much as we can. And the reality is adapt to as we're adapting to this increase in fire that we're seeing in the Mountain West and in California. So it's something that we have dialed in, the inertia of the climate system, the fact that it's going to keep going, even if we shut down all of our greenhouse gas emissions right now, we're still dialed in for changes over the next couple decades.
All right. Peter Dicarlo, Associate Professor at Johns Hopkins University, and Dr. John Balms of UCSF and UC Berkeley, and a spokesperson for the American Lung Association. Thank you. Thank you to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Mabel Zhang. Thanks for watching.